Yes. Welcome everybody to today's Intelligent Property Investor Masterclass. Now, as you know, for those of you who've been listening to me for a while, we do this every week and we talk about what's going on in the market, what's really happening globally, and particularly what's happening in our property market and how we can take advantage of things. If you haven't heard me before, there's a whole series here for you to go and listen to and enjoy. Now, we post this on our website, iloverealestate.tv, as well as on our YouTube channel, which is I Love Real Estate again, and also out onto Spotify and onto iTunes. So if you're listening to me on Spotify or iTunes and you'd like a better experience, you can always come across to one of the other forums, particularly the website is probably the easiest, iloverealestate.tv, and you can get all of my charts as well, because I show a lot of charts and data and evidence and all sorts of other things that we consume every week. And another great thing to do is, of course, to subscribe to my channel, because then you get this stuff coming to you automatically. So let's get into the masterclass. Obviously, we've got a lot to cover this week. We've had a budget, we've had all sorts of things going on. So let's get into exactly what we will cover. Now, the first thing is I want to cover why the recent budget was the most property-friendly budget of all time, or at least for in a long time. Why the global consumers are feeling very pumped up at the moment, why apartments are out and detached housing is in, interesting one there, and also which rental markets are absolutely scorching right now. But first of all, we may as well tackle the elephant in the room, and that, of course, is COVID, and in particular the COVID jabs. You see, they are still governing everything that happens to us here in Australia, but particularly overseas. Now, this is a chart that shows you how the predictions for getting the first jab and dose and all of those other things have been across the world, and whether they're meeting their targets or not. Now, look, whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, this is the facts. The facts are that the vaccination programs are what the whole world is pushing right now. Now, they are pinning their economies basically on a vaccination program. I don't think that's particularly the right thing to do, but the fact is that is what's happening internationally. This chart here shows how the lockdowns, the effect of the lockdowns basically. Now, we're back over here in May, and you can see, let's just look at China as an example. China is the red one here. I'll just put it on the big chart for you. China is the red one. So clearly they had the most impact. They locked down the whole country basically in the early stages. And then there was the wave that kind of hit the rest of the world. And you can see how economically, 70%, 60%, 50% of those areas were actually in lockdown. And how that's gradually come down. We've had a few bounce ups, like Western Europe as an example. Latin America is pretty tough at the moment. And even some of Asia that is not that doesn't include China. China's practically down to no economic impact at all at the moment. But I thought that was a good chart just to show you how, how the economies, because of the lockdowns, have been so intrinsically linked to COVID and what's happening there. And this chart really shows that as well, because what this shows is the impact of COVID-19 on GDP, which is the growth of the economy. That is the activity in the economy. And, you can see back in April, which was the worst of it, a bit over a year ago now, you can see how dramatically across the countries they were affected. Then it kind of, decreased, and it still has a, somewhere around a 4 to 5%, depending on which country you're actually looking at there. So it's having an impact. It really is. As far as Australia is concerned, we are doing so well. I mean, I think it's partly because we're an island and we saw what was happening in everybody else's winter, and we could kind of react a little bit sooner than perhaps other areas did with shutting the borders and all of those sort of things. But this is a chart that shows the recovery in employment. And you'll see there that New Zealand and Australia are the only ones that have their employment rates back up to where they were pre-COVID. Every other country is still behind where they were pre-COVID. And somewhere like poor old Peru, it's out there at 17.5% in the unemployment rates, whereas the Australia's well and truly into the positives now. New Zealand's doing better than us, but we're both doing really, really well. Now that, of course, is boosting confidence. Confidence is very upbeat. And this chart shows on the world stage, confidence is upbeat, not just here in Australia, but if we looked at the charts for Australia, we are particularly upbeat here because of our results with the economic turnaround that we've had back to the positive. And the other thing is that all the banks, the central banks and everything, are flush with money. Across the country, they're flush with money. All of the countries have gone into quantitative easing, which means printing money, and they push that money out into the economy, their own economies. And what that has meant is that we've had this massive surge in confidence, individually and also at a business level as well. Now, the big news for the week, of course, was the Australian budget. And there was a lot of stuff went down. It was a splash for cash, really, is what it was. And I'm not going to go through it, but here's what happened. That's all the money that's being splashed out there in a whole lot of sectors. I think what I need to cover with you guys, because you can read these kind of things in the Financial Review and all of those other things, what I need to cover with you is what happened from a property perspective, because this masterclass is very much about property. What's going to happen in the property market? So property related to the budget, first of all, the single parent support. So basically someone with certain income qualifications, you've got to be under a certain amount of income that you receive, etc. But if you're a single parent, you can actually get into a property with as little as a 2% deposit. So what that means is that the government is actually guaranteeing a further 18% of your deposit to bring it back under the no mortgage insurance limits of the banks. So that's pretty big news. Now, that coupled with the fact that they've opened up another 10 spaces for the home loan deposit scheme where they're guaranteeing a certain amount of the deposit, what it means is that for new builds, they're really encouraging new builds. Now, that actually is a good thing, because it's all very well to say we're undersupplied, and we are. But if you don't give incentives that support new home building as opposed to buying an existing property, the undersupply continues to perpetuate. This was one of the discussions around the first homeowners grant and how, the first homeowners grant encourages people to get into their first home, and that's all great. But if it's not directed towards building a new home, then our undersupply problem continues to exacerbate, because there's even more people out there wanting homes and pushing up pricing. So at least with this and some of the other measures, the first single parent, etc., what it does is it allows the supply chain to be generated. I do have a little bit of a fear with this, because at the moment, with the Home Builders Grant, which was part of the last budget, it really put a strain on the construction industry. So there's a massive, massive shortage of tradies. And in a lot of areas, tradies are charging whatever they want, because they're just in that much demand. I'm very pleased that my youngest son has decided to do an apprenticeship, and he must be second year apprenticeship now, apprentice in the building industry. So there's a big, big need in that space. There was a lot of incentives there for apprentices as well. Access to the super, so they've made the conditions of being able to access super for home purchases and things like that a little bit easier, and the downsizer contributions extended. So what that means is that you're able to put more into superannuation in the tax advantaged environment to be able to fund longer term investments and things like that. But of course, when you couple that with the ability to be able to set up a self-managed super fund, I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't, you've got to go and get advice on it, but a self-managed superannuation fund can actually invest in property, and your superannuation fund can borrow. So what that means is it opens the door now to a lot of those getting a little bit closer to retirement to really start to focus on getting larger amounts of money into a superannuation environment where it is tax advantaged, and then perhaps look at self-managed superannuation funds where they're able to go and borrow to go and buy properties. And of course, the older you get, the type of property you need to be buying is a property that is high in income. So income yield is more important than the value of the property, because the value of the property, you know, in retirement, you can't go and take a brick out of the corner and buy your groceries. You actually have to have the income high enough to be able to support a pension and things like that. So the ideal, of course, is to get a debt-free asset in retirement, where you've got that income coming in. If you structure it the right way and put it into pension phase and a whole heap of other stuff, you can probably have the income tax-free as well from a certain age. So that's there. And of course, the massive thing that I have been predicting and talking about for a lot of months now is infrastructure spending. Now, this is going to create more jobs. It's going to create more pressure on the construction industry too, I might add. But what it also means is that that money then circulates in the economy, and we have this upward lift in jobs and spending, and therefore that flows onto GDP and housing and everything else that flows from that. And that's really shown here in the construction boom. And you can see here, now if we go back to 2001 through to 2020, this dotted line here at the bottom is where they expected infrastructure to basically hang around. By the time we got to 2015, everything had been ramped up again because we'd come out of GFC, and you know, GFC obviously put a big strain on things, so we had to ramp up the infrastructure spending, which is what has happened here. And then now, 2021 through to 2023, you can see how much higher the infrastructure spending is here on projects underway and forecast, etc., because of COVID. So every time there is a bit of a hiccup in the economy, this is what happens, and they go out to, you know, to push the money out there to create more jobs, to create more infrastructure, which in the long term, of course, benefits us. The tricky part from a politician's perspective is to get the right infrastructure. So yes, there's roads and there's black spots and there's all of those other things. A lot of that's actually state as well and council. But there's hospitals, there's universities, which are state, and then you go to bridges and defence forces and you know, I would love to see personally, and this is me getting on my bandwagon, we have this massive middle of Australia where hardly anybody lives and we've got hardly any water. Now, there was a proposal put out in the 40s, which was called the Ord River scheme or something. It was going to cost hundreds of millions back then. It was going to cost a lot more now. But what that would do is actually diverted all of that water that's basically just gets wasted and thrown out into the ocean down through the centre of Australia, right through the guts. You have pipelines, you have, you know, outlets going out, and all of that land in the middle could actually become much more productive than it is right now, creating more jobs, creating more centres, creating more everything else. So look, there's a lot of stuff that could be on the table. A lot of the stuff that is on the table from an infrastructure perspective is all about buying votes. It's got nothing to do with actually long-term benefits of the economy. But that's my opinion. You may have a different opinion, and that's the great thing about a democracy is we've got the ability to be able to voice our opinion. So whether you agree with me or not, it doesn't matter. The fact is we've all got our say to be able to go, well, you know, these are the kind of things that matter. And normally it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. So there's a lot of stuff on climate change and all that, which I'm not opposed to, but there are a lot of bigger projects that could be supported that would make massive change for us here in Australia, rather than a lot of the smaller stuff which gets a lot of noise but doesn't actually have a lot of impact either from a jobs or a longevity perspective in this country. So I might have offended a few people there, but that's the reality of the figures. Now, this chart shows the real recovery in GDP, and I'll just put it on the big screen for you. Over on the left-hand side, you can see there how we're tracking from recovery out of COVID, and the line there is, I think, pretty predictable and very, very achievable. And then the growth through the COVID and everything, and how we've responded immediately back up here. So we've already had 2 quarters of positive growth. We did have 2 quarters of negative growth. These two here, I'll just put on here. These two were our 2 quarters of negative growth last year, and that's what actually put us into a technical recession, because you need 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP or negative growth in order to have a recession. Now, we haven't had one of those since the early 90s. So since the 90s is the first one we've actually had. GFC didn't even give us that. Now we've had 2 consecutive positive growth quarters coming out of that, and that's created that turnaround, which is great. Employment, very similar story. In fact, we are better than anybody ever thought. I didn't expect the unemployment rates to get up to the 15% like some of the economists were predicting at the time. We got to about 7.8, I think, was our peak, but this is what we're actually coming down to. So you can see here, you know, this is where we're trending down to where we expect to be by June 2023, which I think we're pretty much on target to do that. So let's have a look at the Australian economy in its, you know, just as a snapshot here. First of all, conditions and confidence are at record highs. We have not, for the last 4 decades really, had confidence as high as they are right now. So that is fueling a huge amount of growth. It's fueling a huge amount of capital expenditure and other things. We're back on track from retail sales, and you can see here where we were tracking over the long term. Then we have this up and down, but look where we are. Retail sales are decades in advance of where they were expected to be if the pandemic didn't happen. So we are more than recovering from COVID. Capital expenditure is also up. Now, this is something that I'm very excited about, because capital expenditure puts us in good stead for the future. Because when we go and spend money on a new printing machine or a new manufacturing machine or a new tractor or a new something, what we're actually doing is we're investing now for something into the future, which has a longer term economic benefit into the future. So this is good news, because what this means is that we're going to have much more of a positive future as a result of the capital expenditure that's happening right now. And this shows you business confidence in Australia. And you can see, back in 2010, back over there, was actually when confidence was up, as high as it is here from a business confidence perspective. Now, you think about pricing back in 2010 and what happened to pricing thereafter. It went up phenomenally. And that's the kind of ride that we're actually in for right now. So let's just have a look at specifically the dwelling construction boom, because we've got this massive building boom going on. It's been fueled initially by the Home Builders Grant of last year, all of the access to super to go into your first home, the First Homeowners Grant, and the guaranteeing of deposits and all of those things. So it's all fueling new construction. So what that means is the dwelling approvals have spiked, but they were coming down for some time. So that was all because of APRA and them getting very tough on the banks and basically prohibiting lending. So applications came down, but we've now spiked on all levels. We're coming back up again, and it needs to happen because we are dramatically undersupplied in the housing sector. This actually shows you housing approvals. Now, you can see it's a fuzzy line. I'll put it on the big screen so you can see it. Lots of fuzzy lines going everywhere, but each one of those colours represents a period of time. The blue one is where we're at for 2021. So just visually look at that and go, oh my God, look how much we are, the applications have increased so far this year from all of this stimulus that we've had compared to any of those other years right back to 2012. So, very, very marked. And this is just for housing. I mean, the other one was included units because it was dwellings in total, but this is just housing, and housing is very, very pronounced. You can't help but just look at that and go, well, this is a good thing because we are so undersupplied. It needs to happen, and it is happening. When we start talking about commodities, though, look, commodities are running with us as well. And because we are a commodity-based country, then the commodities are really what is continuing to drive our economy over and above internally what we're doing on the space of unemployment and infrastructure spending and construction, stimulus and all of those things. It's actually the commodities industry which is adding a double whammy to our growth and our recovery, and why Australia is doing exceptionally well. So if you look at this, this is the spot index on the Bloomberg's, which just shows commodities in general. This is the metals. So if you look at that, you can see again the index for metals generally, and we are very heavily metal based here. Iron ore, if you just look at iron ore, now obviously this is our strongest export and makes the most difference to our balance of trade and how we interact with the rest of the world. The iron ore supply has yet to improve. So when we look at iron ore shipping to China, it has come down, but there's plenty of other charts that show you that has been replaced immediately into other sectors. This is the steel, so still along the same line. This is coal, and in particular thermal coal. So this is coal that is used to fire power stations, which is the one that everybody complains about, not the coking coal, which is used to make steel. But you can see there we are, the pricing is up, and again, we are so heavily as a coal exporter, this is all pushing up our dollar, and it's creating more wealth for Australia. Soybeans, not much of an impact for us, but I thought I'd throw it in anyway, just to show you that across the board, the base requirements for living, whether it be construction or whether it be power or whether it be food, are all up. And this is the World Food Index. And again, you can see, we haven't been up as high as this since we were back post GFC, back in 2010, 2011, those kind of periods of time. So what's happening specifically in the property market in Australia? All right. Well, you can see here, first of all, mortgages are up. Now, that's predictable because we've got all of these incentives for people to get out into the market and build a new home or buy a new home or any of those things. So, of course, they've got to get their money somewhere. Loans are up. Now, this is a good thing also because a lot of the restrictions that were put on the banks have now been lifted. The banks are actually being encouraged to lend. So that's freeing up the economy as well, because the ability to be able to borrow in an economy is like the lifeblood of the economy. It really is what is needed to make the whole thing go round and tick and everything else. This one here is just showing you that the loans are up both for investors and for owner-occupiers. So it's not just the investors jumping in and speculating, it's very much the owner-occupiers as well. And that a lot of that is first-time owners at the very bottom. New homes for owner-occupiers, again, same thing, it's up. It's about where we were back in 2010, which was when the market really started to turn and prices started to go up. So this is a proportion of houses that are cheaper to buy by state. Now you can see there that how much in the state is actually affordable. Or New South Wales and Victoria are the worst because most of their population live in Sydney or Melbourne. But if you actually get outside that, it is actually quite affordable. You get to places like Queensland, 86%. You get out of southeast Queensland, most of it's very affordable. Northern Territory, 98.5% affordable. South Australia, 76.2%, ACT's nearly 70%, and Tassie, 82.4%. So, you can see there that it is filtering through, but there is still a lot of very affordable housing, which means even if you can't afford to buy your own home and you live in downtown Sydney or Melbourne, there's plenty of opportunity to buy investment properties in other areas, even in your own state, and be able to get in at affordable levels. So you're basically rent vesting. And that's something that I'd actually like to talk to you about right now, because one of the things that I'm offering you is the ability to be able to have an appointment with one of my advisors. So all the details are here. All you have to do is go to iloverealestate.tv/questions/ and you can actually take up one of the appointments with one of my advisors. Now, the advisors only have limited time. It's an hour-long appointment. So if you're lucky enough to get one of those appointments, make sure that you write it in your diary and you turn up. Otherwise, you're taking an appointment away from somebody else who really might need it. But the advisors will go through where you are, what your goals are, what you want to do, what where you want to head, all of those sort of things, and then talk to you about how we can help you and how what we do in I Love Real Estate and the very strong coaching and education programs that we run can really help you with that. It's going to be very advantageous for you to actually even have the appointment. A lot of these things can actually be a follow-on from that, where it may be where you're at right now is rent vesting rather than buying your own home. Possibly, I don't know. It depends on your circumstances, and certainly by having one of those appointments, you'll be able to get a better feel for what you need to be doing to be moving forward and how we can help you with that. So this is units. Units are a very similar story, and the other one was housing. Now, the other thing, when you have a rising market, what happens is that, the auction clearance rates go up. So more houses are sold at auction or within 14 days from auction. These are sorry, I was talking about auction clearance rates. That's coming up next. This is the vacancy rates. The other thing, when you have a rise in an economy and things are going well, vacancy rates come down. So that's what this is showing here. You can see here for March, as we look here as a percentage, or April as a percentage, 3% vacancy for Sydney and Melbourne. Now, I just want, and Melbourne's 4%. The reason I want to highlight those two is because both of those markets have an oversupply in units. Now, as you know, I'm not particularly keen on the unit market, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But there is a massive oversupply in that particular market. So it's bringing the vacancy rates up. If you look at the rest, though, Brisbane here at 1.4, Perth at 0.9, Adelaide at 0.7, Canberra at 0.7, Darwin at 0.5 and Hobart at 0.5, you can see here the rest of the country doesn't have that problem. And because vacancy rates are so low, it's having an upward pressure on pricing. And that will continue for some time. This just shows you, again, the similar type of figures. So as the other thing that plays into that is yield. So as the rents go up, when vacancy rates are low, it has upward pressure on rents. So rents go up, vacancies go down, or vacancies go down, then rents go up. And in the month of April, across the nation, even considering we've got an oversupply of units in Sydney and Melbourne, what we have seen is a rise of 4.9% increase in the rental yield on properties in that 1 month. Now, that's pretty extraordinary. And it's not just in the major capital cities, it's actually in the regional areas as well. So, if you take up one of those advisor appointments, talk to them about what your goals are, because a lot of the solutions are included in what we teach and how you can move forward regardless of your circumstances. Again, this is a chart. I think I've showed you this chart last week, but it just shows you the change in rents. The two that are dragging, particularly in the unit market, look at this. This tells the story I've been saying. This is Sydney and Melbourne, oversupplied in units and therefore not performing. This is the auction clearance rates. This is what I was talking about before. I thought I was looking at the wrong slide. You can see here that auction clearance rates are definitely up. And that's a trend that is continuing. And when more properties are sold at auction, what it means is it's a hotter market, things are moving more rapidly, and you've got to be quick to get in. This is not something that you can dilly-dally with. It's not something that you need to stuff around with. This shows you the clearance rates across the cities and the numbers and everything else. But, if you're anything over a 60% clearance rate, and we're up at 77.7 this last month, you're doing very, very well. So my truth bomb for the week, just to round off the masterclass, is that time is a weapon. Now, time is our most valuable resource. Time is the one thing that we can't produce. We need to be very conscious of our time and not waste our time. And this is why when you get educated and you start to make educated decisions, you don't get caught in the trap of time wasting and, in fact, making mistakes that waste your time and your money. Now, the other thing about time is a weapon. And if you just chip away at things little bit by little bit by little bit and constantly improving, over time it makes massive difference. I put this chart in here because so many people, so many uneducated people quit here. They quit just before there is a dramatic increase in the curve, and I don't want that to be you. So that's why I've set aside these breakthrough sessions with one of my advisors. They're 60 minutes long. All you've got to do is jump on, make an appointment. It's iloverealestate.tv/questions/ and write it in your diary to make sure that you turn up on time and that you are, that you're doing everything that you can to maximise what is a remarkable time in history and one that you can't afford to make mistakes with, which is why our education programs and our coaching programs are going to be the very best thing for you to do right here, right now in the market, because that's what's going to set you up through a time when you can't afford to be making mistakes. So guys, that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed my Intelligent Property Investor Masterclass for the week. I'll be back again next week. Take my offer up there on the breakthrough sessions. Get yourself an appointment and I will see you again next week. So bye for now.